All right, welcome back. In our previous JavaScript tutorial, we looked at sort of the building blocks of JavaScript, right? So variables and if statements and for loops, and we did a basic example of choosing a random element from an array every time our code is being run. And those are things that are valid inside of JavaScript no matter in which environment it's run, right? So I was mentioning that JavaScript functions kind of like any other programming language, and it has the advantage that it can be used in the browser. If you run JavaScript outside of the browser, all of the stuff that we covered stays the same. However, in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the document object model, which is specifically how JavaScript interacts with HTML and with CSS inside of the browser, right? And this is where things get interesting for us in terms of being able to dynamically manipulate our web pages, in terms of being able to add more interactivity to our projects. And I have the same project that we were working on in the previous video. And what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to go inside of index.html and create a new script in order to talk more about the document object model. So the script tag, script tag with source equals to, let's say, /script dom.js. DOM stands for document object model. I'm gonna talk about it in a second. And I'm actually going to comment out the first script for now. And let's create a new file and call it script dom.js. And right now it's an empty script. I'm going to clear the console as well, so we're not bothered by anything in there. And yeah, so the document object model, it's sort of a programming interface that allows JavaScript to manipulate HTML and CSS. As you remember, HTML has this like nested structure, right, where everything is inside of the HTML tag, and then there's the body, which can have a few children, and then each one of those children has a few other children, right? So it sort of works like a tree, where there's the root, which is in HTML, and then it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And it turns out that that's an interface that's quite easy to access programmatically. And the way we can access the HTML structure of our page from within JavaScript is using the document keyword. This is something. Document is a variable that exists in JavaScript in the browser anytime, right? It's not a JavaScript keyword per se, but the browser makes sure that JavaScript has access to this. Before the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to print it to the console log and see what's in there. Console.log document. Right, so we see it showed up in our console. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Right, so we see this thing that's called HTML document, and then we see the URL of our page. If we open this, we see there's a bunch of stuff inside of there. We have the URL, we have an active element, which is the body. It's probably what the mouse is closest to right now. We have children, which we're going to be working with a lot, which really contains the structure of our document, right? So we have the HTML tag at first. If we open that and go into its own children, we see that the HTML element has one child, which is the head, and another child, which is the body. And if we go into the body's children, we see that it's an empty collection, a collection of length 0, right? So let's add, say, 2 or 3 divs to our body just to make sure we can observe them in here. So I'm going to go back inside of index.html and add div class equals red. I'm just going to add a few stripes, a few colored divs. Red, blue, and green. I'm also going to give them the rectangle class, and we're all going to make them all the same width and height. Rectangle, rectangle, and now let's create a style file for these classes. So link rel equals style sheet, and href equals style.css. I always forget whether link takes a src attribute like script or an href like the link. So it turns out it's href. I'm going to add a new file, call it style.css, and have our dot rectangle in here. Let's say width 100%, height 25 pixels, and then dot red, background color red, green, background color green, and blue, background color blue. Alright, so we have our 3 stripes, and now if we go back into our script DOM and let's clear the console so we have a blank slate, refresh the page. If we take another look inside of the HTML document, we see body, right? And if we open the body and if we go into the children, we see 3 elements, right? We see the first div, the red one, we see the second one, the blue one, and we see the third one, the green one, right? So this is sort of the basic principle under which the document object model stores its elements, right? Like there's HTML on the top, which has the children property. Inside of the children, we'll find the children of that. So if we were to print, instead of document, just document.body, that's how we can access the body. I'm going to clean the console and refresh. We see that we get null. And you might be wondering why that is, right? Like we saw that there is a property called body inside of the document. We should just be able to access it. And it turns out this is happening because our script is running before the page gets to load, right? So the script is included in the head. The moment it's included in here, code starts, inside of script DOM, code starts executing. And that happens before the browser actually has time to render our page. So in order to get over this problem and be able to access our HTML, our body, and all of our other tags from within JavaScript, we need to sort of plug in to an event listener which tells us when the page has been loaded. I'm not going to get too much into events and event listeners right now. I think in 2 weeks we're going to be talking more about it. For now though, just sort of memorize this, the thing that I'm going to write, and make sure to always place your code inside of that if you want the code to interact with JavaScript, to interact with HTML. So it goes like this. We say window. Window is another global object, sort of like document, which refers to the page in itself and the browser as well. We can print it to the console log afterwards and see what happens. Window.add event listener. The event that we're listening for is DOM content loaded, right? So this is a specific event that the browser is sending to the window object whenever the HTML has finished loading. And then we want to execute a piece of code once this event has been fired. And that piece of code is going to be a function. So we have to say function, open and close parentheses, and then open and close some curly brackets. If we print our document.body inside of here, so let's do again, console.log should be loaded, document.body, and wait for the page to reload, we see that our top print statement prints the body as null, but the second one actually has the body tag, right? So if we hover over it, it gets highlighted in our page, and then we can open it go inside of its children property and see the three divs that we're working with, and look at some of the other attributes in there as well. See, there's a lot of stuff. All of these, on pointer up, on pointer over, all of these are events, and they work very similarly to the DOM content loaded. They refer to various types of user interactions, and again, we're going to get more into events in 2 weeks, I believe. Right, so recap. Always use window.addEventListener DOM content loaded if you want to interact with HTML from JavaScript. I'm going to remove this top part, the console log, and let's take a quick look at this window object that I was talking about earlier. I'm going to comment out this console log as well. Let's print window to the console. So window, as I was saying, is a global object that's sort of similar to the document one, and has it's actually way smaller than the document. It's useful for figuring out when the page is loaded. Also useful for sort of programmatically navigating between different sites within the same page. It's more related to the browser than to the actual page that we are currently on. But for now, all we need to care about is this one event on the window that allows us to interact with HTML. Great. So what should we do next? We should let's add some CSS, or like let's change some CSS using JavaScript, right? So we're getting into dynamically changing our page from code as opposed to writing stuff inside of style.css. So as we've seen, we can access the body by typing document.body, right? So now body is in its own variable called body. And the really cool thing about this whole DOM is that we can dynamically change any CSS property on any object, on any HTML tag in here. For now, we're going to work with body, and we can just say body.style. Right, body.style gives us all of the CSS properties of body. So if we print that to the console, let's say console.log body.style, we see a CSS properties object, and there's lots of them, right? Like there's literally all of the CSS properties that are available, but we start seeing some familiar ones, right? Like border radius or border right, a bunch of stuff around borders. Right, some flex related stuff, right? So pretty much any CSS that we would want to. And the way to access one particular property inside of there is by using a syntax that's sort of similar to the array syntax, right? So we have to open and close the square brackets, and then within quotes type the name of the property that we're interested in changing. And remember, if you remember, for the array we needed to use like a number for the index. Body.style is an object, which is another data type in JavaScript that we haven't really covered yet. And an object is basically like an array, but its indices can be strings as well, right? They don't have to be numbers. So if we say body.style and then as an index pass it background color and then set its value to, let's say, purple, we see our page has turned purple, right? And there is no style that does that. It's all from JavaScript, right? So the moment the page has loaded, we make sure our body background color becomes purple. All right, so yeah, maybe let's open this in the new window, right? So it's the same thing over and over and over again. And maybe one thing we could do here is bring in some of the random code that we wrote in our previous tutorial and make it such that the body background color gets randomized every time a user refreshes the page or every time a new user comes to the page. And in order to do that, maybe we're just going to write it from scratch, just for practice. We're going to define an array of colors, right? So we're going to say var colors equals purple, pink, orange, and let's say black as well. And then we want to get a color, like a random color every time from this array. We're going to start with always the first color, right? So we're going to say var index equals 0, and then body.style for background color is going to be equal to colors of index, right? So we're slowly building our way towards this randomization. If we change this index manually, the body background color should change. Great. Right, so I think very often when writing JavaScript or any kind of code, it's always kind of a gradual process. If we want to automate something, we take it step by step, right? So right now, instead of having randomization work automatically, we tweak it by hand, right? And like once this works, we're able to go to the next step, which is actually implementing the random function. Right, so we create our random number, math.random, and then we do our trick with multiplying the random number between 0 and 1 to the length of the colors array and taking the integer part of that number. So index is going to be random number times colors.length, and then we need to apply math.floor on it. Alright, so now whenever we refresh the page, we should be getting a different background color. Alright, so far so good. And maybe let's do one more thing. Let's get to even more granularity in terms of the background color. For now, it's just going to be a selection between 4 different colors. What if we wanted it to be a random color out of like all of the possible colors that the computer can display? And maybe you remember that, I'm going to comment out this line. Maybe you remember that one other way to do coloring in CSS is by using the Rgba function, right? So if we say Rgba and then a red value of 255, a green value of 128, a blue value of 12, and a transparency, like opacity value of 1, we get an orange, right? It's like a lot of red with some green and almost no blue. We could randomize these 3 numbers, right? And get a selection of, and get a random color out of everything that's possible within the computer display. And in order to do that, we're gonna have to create basically 3 random numbers, right? The red value, the green value, and the blue value. They all need to be between 0 and 255. And then we need to plug in those numbers inside of this string. So the way we're gonna do that, very similar to what we did for the array. Let's say var red value equals, we're going to start with math.random, right, the value between 0 and 1. We're going to multiply it by 256, which is how many possible values there are. And we're going to take the integer part of it, right, so math.floor. Right, so this is going to give us a random number between 0 and 255. Let's look at it in the console to make sure it's what we want. All right, so we have a 39, 59, 35, 239. Yeah, looks about right. All right, so we want the exact same thing for the green value and for the blue value. So I'm just going to change this to green value and blue value. Right, so now we have 3 different numbers for red, green, and blue, and we want to plug them into into this. As you can see, the way to specify the CSS properties is using a string, right? We have it in between quotes, which means that it's a string. So we need to somehow find a way to insert these variables inside of the string. Turns out JavaScript makes that really easy for us. We can just use the plus operator to concatenate strings even with numbers. So we could say something like var CSS color equals, and then just like really build the string out of pieces and insert our numbers in there. So we can start with Rgba open parenthesis plus red value, right? So we're here. And then we need to add a comma and a space, and then we need to add our green value, and then we need to add another comma, another comma and another space, comma space, plus our blue value, right? So we're here, and then we need to add a comma, a space, and then the opacity value, which I'm going to keep for 1 for now, and then close the parentheses. Right, so let's print our CSS color to the console just to see what we've built. And the color is not changing yet in the page because we still have the constant orange that we played with earlier. Right, so we have Rgba 124, 86, 177, 1, which looks about right. So let's do it again. We get a different color, All right, so that means we could probably just plug it into the body style background color and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to come here. All right, so now every time we refresh our page, we get a completely random color, which is kind of fun. Great. I think I'm going to stop here with this tutorial, and then in the next one, we're going to take a look at how we can do this kind of styling, but also addressing for elements that are not the body, right? So for divs inside of the body, and just like going very specific. And we're also going to take a look at how to add or remove tags programmatically from JavaScript. Thank you.